The Patriots have been doing the same thing. We're not the only ones. We have fought it legislatively, we have fought it administratively, and we're right up to that point where we've almost run out of options. We're almost up to the wall. And at this point, it's just a matter of, again, deciding when they decide to go fanatic, we must defend ourselves. Yes?
Mark, when you talk about never again with the Waco type incident, you say this church, for instance, a lot of people asked us when we're disseminating this information to them, how are we going to handle the next one? Are we going to allow the militia in the area to take care of it? Or are we going to load up and travel there and handle it?
Elements should be prepared that are the best available to perhaps assist whatever takes place locally. That does not mean that you strip your resources here, because I personally believe that when the next one happens, which will be quite abusive, it will make Waco, and we all know how terrible that was, it will make Waco seem pleasurable, because the first assault will be much more disciplined, much more aggressive, and will be far more brutal and destructive in their initial action. They must terrify the people. To do that, they will use whatever force is available and necessary to create that destruction.
Will that not kind of overrun the local militia unless they're really well organized?
Well, as much as anything else, remember this: we're fighting in a different plane. And one of the problems that I've seen, in fact, with Waco, in watching the videotapes, everything that we've seen, all the different information, the only thing I'm sorry to say is this: that we had the capability to deal with the external forces even though they were in depth. In other words, they had an external crust security that was 20 miles out, that was kind of roving to see what was on the road. They had internal helicopter security and support surrounding the area. That was irrelevant. Then they had their ground elements, which to me were, first of all, some were professional. The inner core of the murderers were. But all the auxiliaries that they brought in were from all over the country and were no better equipped nor any better prepared than your best regular militia regiments. And what would have to happen is patience. There was a 51-day siege there. Personally, by day 22 to 25, that situation should have been in our hands. And in looking at it overall, we could have dealt with the threat. The armor was irrelevant. I've seen the internal photographs and the internal videos that were done by the FBI and the ATF. With that photo intelligence, I can lay down a complete overview and explain to you what they were doing from the outside. Knowing that, we could have effectively disemboweled them. The armor would have been ours, the helicopters would have been useless, and we could have laid siege to them in reverse. Actually, I wouldn't have done it. I would have actually eaten them alive. And it would have been necessary. It could have been an option. Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I need to make just a quick announcement.
Go right ahead, please.
Play a little devil's advocate. Do you think maybe the Waco was a test to see if it could draw something out, see if it could draw militia out?
Well,
to test the...
They wanted to test to see, first of all, if we were willing to react and how far they could go. The initial attack was supposed to be more successful. I'll give my view of what happened.
It seemed like they didn't keep going in. In other words, they stayed outside shooting. They really didn't, the whole crowd normally charges in and something like that. That's why it kind of acted a little funny, like maybe that's what they were looking for, kind of not really charge in and just cause this standoff to see if they could draw out, a bigger, the set march along.
You mean with the initial attack?
Yeah.
Well, the initial attack is typical of what would be expected, but what they expected was a different response. What that was a classic hammer and anvil operation. The forces that hit initially were supposed to drive either blunt shock anybody who was initially made contact with, and was to panic the rest of the group to fall back out of the building or to surrender in panic.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. It seemed like 2 cattle truck loads of these guys arrived, and only, we see a couple on the roof, and a couple ran in, a couple ran... in other words, it seemed to me, if it was going to be a frontal attack, they all would have gone and knocked the door down like you see in these, TV talk shows.
A lot of them?
And everybody went right in the door, and the whole mob. But the majority stayed out front.
The majority in the initial...
Just shooting in the windows.
Well, because there's only... Okay, you gotta understand what happened here. First of all, explain the overall action. In a hammer and anvil operation, the objective is to create terror and drive the occupant.
Okay.
The helicopter elements were not just diversion. Their objective, in fact, really the front was a diversion. The helicopter support was supposed to come in, and after initially engaging the way it did, would drop its support to the rear of whatever action force was pushing. As the dazed occupants flee, or fall back, or scream and holler running from the house, The anvil picks up the resistance, picks up the leftovers. And between the two, they're herded into a, like we said, a hammer and anvil mechanism, squashed between the middle. Now, there was only a limited amount of, there were only a limited number of points where they could make contact and break through. And obviously, they tried to execute the initiative with some surprise, which they knew they'd lost. So I think there was some apprehension on the part of the attack forces. I will tell you this, these are paid mercenaries, they're not professionals. And because of that, as I think came out in the trial, and most people here we could discuss it, what scared them the most is when they forced them to write their blood type on their neck. That's something that they'd never done in the past, and what that told me is they expected casualties on both sides. The ideal situation was to create panic. They picked a target that traditionally had been soft, that had cooperated in the past. What better target to abuse? But somebody who in the past has been told, oh, when they show up, we're going to show them what we got, we'll be fair, we'll be equal, we'll be nice. Well, they didn't care about that. And in reality, what they were hoping to do is that when these people came forward, when they came out, you'd have some bloody casualties and maybe some dead. You'd have the children sobbing, which is what they had to have for the propaganda. Remember, everybody was being abused. Everybody was being abused.
What I'm wondering is, maybe it was set that way to get this stand-up going to see if you draw the militia out.
Well, the next problem with that is, see, they did not. You got to understand the perspective of the aggressor. He did not understand, nor even now. I'm really serious about this because I've seen this. I've worked from the other end. They did not perceive at that time fully our capabilities with regard to the militia. They knew that some existed, and they've never considered them a serious threat. They perceived this objective had a propaganda mission. Just like the Weavers was a hunter-killer operation gone awry. This action was supposed to be a demonstration of their fierce totalitarian capability. It was a multi-agency effort. The FBI and the ATF were in the first attack. The FBI helped to coordinate at least, and definitely was involved with giving the air support in roundabout ways by providing the command and control mechanism. We still don't really know who was in the command and control helicopter, which has spiked my curiosity, because traditionally the politicos like to show up to watch their butchery. And that one helicopter is the one that's not accounted for because it disappears later and falls back. The other two, needless to say, were damaged heavily enough that they force landed 2 and 4 miles out. That means that even if whoever shot them, and we might get better information of that, which is what I was hoping tonight to find out. No incrimination involved here, but either way, the helicopters were damaged by some form of small arms fire. They fell back, which means the aggressor lost 1/3 of his combat element with the stroke of a pen. Out. Once those choppers were lost, the troops were lost with them, all of a sudden you have a smaller combat force on the ground.
I cry for my country, for the pain that it's been through. She's been made to suffer for the profit of a few. Storm clouds are forming, winds of change now touch our shores. Our forefathers are crying as the dream's been cruised.